the title of my presentation, you all can see him, what they talk about when they talk about Poland, Israeli third generation's literary journeys to Eretz, Sham, the land over there. In my paper, I would like to focus on the texts whose authors counted among the third post-Holocaust generation on account of different reasons and owing varying strategies, decided to employ the motive of an Israeli journey to Poland. I will make an attempt to point out how different outlooks and aesthetic choices influence the variety of possible consequences of these decisions, while at the same time reflecting some broader phenomena in Israeli collective memory and the tendencies discernible in the process of shaping Israeli identity. I would like to focus on one particular example of different strategies of employing the motive of the topos, actually, of Poland perceived as a Jewish cemetery. And I would like to start with a short quotation. In one of the first scenes of the play Bat Yam by Jagoda and Amit Epstein, Israeli three-generation family travels by a taxi from the Warsaw's airport to a hotel. The taxi driver offers them to stop next to the Jewish cemetery in Warsaw. Then Mili, one of the characters, turns to her father, Yaakov, a Holocaust survivor. She says, "Dad, why don't we get out? Don't you want to see the Jewish cemetery?" Then the father replies, "What is there to see? Look to the left, look to the right. This whole country is a Jewish cemetery." End of the quote. Poland, described in this way, belongs to the constant motives that are used in Hebrew literature to relate to the subject of Shoah. According to Shoshana Gonen, Poland, as described by Israeli authors, is never a neutral space nor an incidental scenery. As the main site of the events of the Shoah, Poland encompasses the experiences of many centuries of thriving Jewish culture, of the Holocaust having put a violent end to what had been known before, as well as the void that had descended upon it. It can be a biographical and organic, as well as metaphysical, symbolic and non-literal shape in Israeli culture. It may become a reminder of gruesome events of the Shoah, point to the contaminated landscapes, as Martin Polak names it, or blur the semantic boundaries between the terms Poland and Auschwitz. In some texts, it is associated with the literally understood land that holds the remains of the dead, buried without a grave. In other, it relies on the perception of Poland as the site of extermination of European Jewry and the space where the end was put to its culture. Thus, it might belong both to the sphere of collective and individual experience, blurring the boundaries between them. In Shimon Samet's reportage Bavoi Lemchorat from 1946, the author writes, "Polish Jewry has been exterminated and will never revive in its old-time strength and glory. Its mute scream is still reaching us from the Death Valley, but for those who survived, the new life is waiting in the newly emerging country, their historical motherland." More than 40 years later, in Yehudit Hendel's reportage Leyat Kvarim Shketim, the category by means of which the author constructs the description of Poland is the void, while the identity of a cemetery is assigned to every single place she wants to visit, but she does not, which she expresses through the constantly repeated phrase, "I did not go to Kałuszyn, Krasnystaw, Krosno. What should I look for there?" Labeling Poland as a Jewish cemetery has become a petrified literary figure that many Jews arriving in the country after the war clung to. In the ideological narratives, this procedure is linked to an enunciation Mishaal et Kuma, which is deeply rooted in the culture and, among other possible interpretations, may indicate the opposition between Poland as a land of death and Israel as a country of revival and life of Jewish nation. Mostly by means of the latter tendency, describing Poland as a Jewish cemetery has become also a cultural cliché that rules the common associations and affects the narratives of pathos, whose degree of common intelligibility in terms of collective cultural imagination makes them easily adaptable to popular visions of the Shoah. An intergenerational change that has occurred in this field is an effect of new currents that appeared in Israeli collective narratives and of identity in the 80s. It was only then that historiography started exploring a critical reflection upon the shape of the existing discourse dealing with the past of Jews and Israel. In the wake of the crisis of the Zionist myth, two new worldviews develop simultaneously. One can be called neo and other post-Zionist, and both of them will be reflected in some of the text I will be speaking of. Along with the publication of Yehuda Elkanah's article Bizchut Hashichecha, there appeared a label of new historians, which was applied to the generation of such authors as Tom Segev, Edith Zertal, or Moshe Zimmerman. They offered a new vision of the past, examined from the post-Zionist perspective, and premised upon the revision of national fantasies and myths that founded the Zionist ideology, as well as on the critique of the common practice of using Holocaust as an argument in political discussions. The latter tendency found its reflection in the text of culture very quickly. Still in the 90s, HaChamishiya HaKamerit cabaret, satirically criticizing various aspects of Israeli reality, related to the topos of Poland as a cemetery in a subversive manner in the skit entitled Sochnei Mesilot, travel agency, but here's like it's kind of a joke that is hard to translate to English, which presents a travel agent offering a trip to Poland that is, and now I quote, basic travel bundle, 12 days, 7 concentration camps, afternoon to be spent in Warsaw Ghetto, and 1 spare day for shopping. The end of the quote. One might argue that this trend has been heavily enforced by the new generation. Its singular critical potentiality, arising from linking the Holocaust with the medium of popular culture, as well as satirical conventions, has been examined by Eyal Zandberg and Liat Stein-Livni. While focusing on the field of television, Zandberg argues that the popular representations of the Shoah can lead both to the critique of objectification of the Holocaust in collective memory and to revision of various different phenomena in the Israeli community. Over 10 years later, a strategy of resisting generalizations has been adopted by a group of artists dedicated to a different medium. Published in 2008, an anthology Kompot, Polish-Israeli comic book, has become a record of the clash between stereotypes that both Polish and Israeli culture abound in. This placed the Holocaust in the background as well as in the very center, turning it into a constant point of reference. The medium of a comic book that has been used by the artist in this case does not remain irrelevant, but by means of its limitations and its capability, it significantly influences the final shape of presented stories. Viewed from this perspective, the role of a comic book seems to forward two fundamental tendencies. On one hand, it favors satirizing the topics that are commonly considered sensitive, and on the other, it radicalizes both the content and the context it is placed within. These two premises have been consequently fulfilled by Israeli authors of Kompot anthology. The ones I focused on in regard to the subject of my paper. The great majority of them aim at critical elaboration on Israeli institutional patterns of memory, at finding generalizations and cliches that have piled up in regard to Poland. They tend to evoke the topos of Poland as a Jewish cemetery by constructing narratives that abound with pathos and are taken to the extremes in order to unveil their shallowness. It is clearly discernible in one of the scenes of Zev's Engelmeyer comic Kurica in Auschwitz. The female protagonist, a rubber hen that embarks on a journey to Auschwitz, starts an affair with a teddy dog of Polish origins in a museum canteen. Against the background of Polish landscape, which brings to mind post-camp image, she says, the grass in Poland is greener, and it has nothing to do with reddish history. Autumn leaves in Poland are not wrinkled memories. They are just autumn leaves. Rain in Poland, it's not tears of the oppressed. It is just H2O. The medium of a comic book has been also used by Rutu Modan in her well-known graphic novel Haneches, which means the property, which is an account of a young Israeli, Mika, and her grandmother Regina traveling to Warsaw, the city the latter spent her childhood and youth in. Other than in the volume Kompot, Modan does not let the satirical convention preponderate. Only at times it is favored against the melodramatic plot, as in scenes criticizing instrumentalization of collective memory. Apparently, reason of the visit is to retrieve a flat which had belonged to the family but was looted during the war. From the very first scene, it is clear that Regina's war experiences have left her with a massive resentment in regard to Poland and the Poles. And this is why she constantly tries to keep her distance. While being on the plane, she claims, and here I quote, "I have no interest in Warsaw. It is just one giant cemetery." Again, the end of the quote. Yet, it turns out that the real target of Regina's journey was not to reclaim a family estate, which apparently does not exist, but to find her pre-war loved one, a Pole. As much as she tries to manifest her animosity towards Poland, it proves to be superficial. Modern exploits the topos of Poland as a massive cemetery and recaptures typical situations expected in this context. A family journey to the world there is nothing to find there, or a school trip whose schedule says, and now I quote, Monday Treblinka, Tuesday Majdanek, gas chambers included. Each of these threads undergoes a gradual process of deconstruction and proves to be superficial, which helps the protagonist release her story. On the plane from Tel Aviv to Warsaw, the woman encounters a group of Israeli high school students who take part in a pilgrimage to memorial sites. Already after a while, Madame makes her younger protagonist distant from this experience. In a conversation with the group's guide, Mika admits that she didn't go to Poland when she was in high school. From the very beginning, this fact creates a distance between her experiences and the one that are commonly shared by her peers. Thereby, an elucidation is being made. Haneches is not that kind of story. The following scene can only further prove this assumption. When Mika first meets Tomasz, a Polish guide in a Warsaw Jewish district, the boy instantly guesses her origins, saying, and here I quote, "Let's see, you are sitting in a cafe in the ghetto, you look sad." The end of the quote. An attempt to approach petrified clichés in regard to emotions evoked by Israeli Jewish trips to Poland in an ironic manner proves to be unsuccessful. Mika's sadness does not have anything to do with the Holocaust, but with her father's recent death. Thereby, the notions of death and mourning change their collective nationally determined traumatic dimension, which has ruled Israeli confrontations with Poland so far. Eventually, the topos of Poland as a Jewish cemetery is refuted in a culminant scene, which takes place on All Souls' Day on a Christian cemetery, most probably on Powązki Cemetery. On the one hand, by setting the action right there, automatic associations that place the terms cemetery and Poland straight in a context to the Holocaust are being hindered. On the other, it leads to a fundamental conclusion within the entire novel. Israeli confrontation with Poland can have more than just one frame. While the division between what is Polish and what is Israeli does not have to be strictly demarcated. Right in the above-mentioned scene, all Polish and Israeli protagonists of Haneches gather together. It also turns out that Regina's Polish beloved man is probably Mika's grandparent. Consequently, the motive of cemetery escapes the symbolic field which Israeli literature confined it within. It becomes a sphere that blurs the boundaries between national perspectives and nationally determined experience. Warsaw, described so, gains more meanings than a simple identity of cemetery. Thereby, it becomes a field of multidirectional memory, according to Michael Rothberg's concept, and here I quote, that the overlap and interference help constitute the public sphere as well as various individual and collective subjects that articulate themselves in it. The end of the quote. Modern's deconstruction of this topos is not limited to the critique of patterns rooted in national narrative, but also calls into question that exclusiveness and unambiguity of an a priori imposed national perspective. And here we have one more picture about with the character, Israeli character, singing El Maleh Hamim on the Christian in the Christian cemetery is also part of this strategy Mudam is adopted. A highly interesting work in this context is Yair Hasdiel's novel Tel Aviv, in which the topos of Poland as a Jewish cemetery is being deconstructed by reversing thought paradigms and employing the convention of alternative history. Not only the fact of having established the state of Israel in its current location, but also the events of the Holocaust have been put into brackets by Hasdiel. Protagonists of Tel Aviv live in a world in which there was no Shoah. Hitler was murdered by a Jewish military group in 1935, and Zionism suffered a final defeat. As a result, the state of Israel has never been proclaimed, and its actual territory has been incorporated into the Kingdom of Jordan. Consequently, the majority of Jewish settlers decided to return to Europe, favorably to Poland, which in 2010, that is when the action is set, is home to half of Jewish world population. By doing so, the author not only neglects the possible description of Poland as a Jewish cemetery, but he even manages to remove it from the sphere of potentiality. The main protagonist is a Polish-born journalist, Paweł Heim, previously known as Rafał Heimlich, who after having abandoned the orthodoxy and his shtetl, started living a comfortable life in Krakow. Yet, he decides to accompany his aged father to a trip to the latter's place of birth, that is, to ruin an abandoned city of Tel Aviv, in which the elderly man wishes to be buried. Already at this point, a certain reversal in terms of the roles that Poland and Israel, or Palestinian territories, play in literature is clearly discernible. Thus, the motive of cemetery does not vanish. It is only its context that is being changed. Descriptions of Tel Aviv, the ghost town, as it is dubbed in the novel, unveil a number of motives that were well known in accounts of Israeli journeys to Poland. So just the direction have been reversed. The end of the story, that is the main protagonist's desire to return to the abandoned city, expressly reveals ideological purpose of the novel, which consists in what one review called a double rejection of the diaspora. The man who is unsuccessfully looking for a place for himself in the world of diaspora, seemingly stable and safe, discovers the core of his identity only when he gets to the land of the fathers. By deconstructing the foundation of collective Israeli identity, that is, Zionist, ideological, and the Holocaust, Hasdiel presents the desire to return to Eretz Israel as independent of these experiences and superior to them. At the same time, his intention is to highlight the pivotal role of the religion plays in the process. Rejecting the topos of Poland as a Jewish cemetery is, in this particular case, meant to prove that Jewish nation's destiny to settle in Israel is enduring and endemic, also when the binary division between the land of death and the land of life is lifted. Dualistic nature of the topos, and now a few words of conclusion, dualistic nature of the topos, a form that is constant on one hand but easily adaptable to changing context on the other, has significantly set the rules for describing Poland as a Jewish cemetery in Israeli common imagination, and let the boundaries between the personal and the collective blur, as well as ideological currents mingle. This very nature proves to be persistent and crucial even when the topos itself undergoes a deconstruction. It proves how intelligible, even if not evoked directly, the topos of Poland as a Jewish cemetery is, and how wide its reach may be. Polish reality depicted in the works discussed, albeit significant, is not important per se, but is rather treated as a cliché that reflects the tendencies developing in the area of Israeli collective memory, and gives a perspective on contemporary mechanisms of collective remembrance, their internal dynamics and diversity. Due to its phantasmatic nature, it enables the author to express various, or even opposite, aesthetic and ideological claims, referring both to the past events and to the current social, political, and cultural context. Considering the constant interaction between past and present, here considered as Israel, and there, in this case, considered as Poland, or between individual and collective memory that reveals in these works. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.